So I just want to say thank you for all who are attending this virtual event organized by Word Up Community Bookshop, Librería Comunitaria. We are a bookshop and art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers. Beyond our virtual events, we can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street in Washington Heights. In person and online, we have hosted events for all ages and sell used and new books, English and Spanish. Check us out at www.wordupbooks.com to place orders. And now you can also pick up orders Tuesday to Friday from 1 to 5 p.m. We've also partnered with the census to remind our community of how important getting counted is. Billions of dollars are at stake for New York. We encourage everyone here to take their census at my2020census.gov and to check in with loved ones to make sure they filled out the census in their preferred languages. Because we're not open to the public for browsing at this time and don't know when we will be open again, we started a Gofundme campaign to maintain our space and meet our obligations while closed. Okay, so during this event, feel free to add comments in the chat panel, which you can access by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, please click the Q and A button and put your questions there so that they don't get lost in the chat. Before I introduce our event, our authors, I just would like to say thank you to Carissa Musialik and Rachel Gorman for facilitating our 10-week-long Lo Más Lit book club, which this event acts as the final event for. It was a pilot program created in part by our moderator for the evening, Angie Cruz, and other Uptown youth. And I just want to thank all of you for making this possible, and also to our authors for coming to close this out. I also want to thank all of our GoFundMe donors and the New York State Council on the Arts, the New York Community Trust, Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zones Arts Engagement Program administered by the Lower Manhattan LMCC for partial support for the books we gave to the teams. Okay, so now it's time to introduce our authors. So Natalia Sylvester is a Miami, Central Florida, and South Texas raised author who blessed us with her YA debut novel, Running. Elizabeth Acevedo is an award-studded author of The Poet X, With the Fire on High, and her most recent novel, Clap When You Land. Jennifer de Leon is an author, editor, speaker, and professor busting out with her debut novel, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. Lilliam Rivera is an award-winning author and writer of various young adult novels, including the forthcoming Never Look Back. And I'm always excited to introduce our Angie Cruz, who is our moderator for the evening. She is a New York-born Dominicana, who's also the author of Dominicana, which we read at the beginning of our Lo Más Lit program. So I'm going to pass on the mic to Angie, and I just want to say thank you all for coming.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. You know, I'm going to be real here. I'm a little bit in a panic state because of what's happening with the forthcoming elections. I just came out of this really amazing meeting with researchers and Latinx actresses and Hollywood people who are basically trying to mobilize the Latinx vote because they have found out through research that only 57, they found out that 57% of eligible Latinx voters are gonna sit out if we don't mobilize them. And the majority of them are young Latinas, which I know is most of our audience today. So I thought I would use the mic to sort of remind us that this is the reason that they found out that many people don't wanna vote is because they're ambivalent or they don't feel like it's gonna make a difference in their own lives. And who could blame them? You know, immigration just gets worse, everything gets worse. And every administration has been so unkind to our communities and unfair. But this election actually really does matter in a way that if we don't start mobilizing our families, and what they found out is that women motivate the entire community, right? We impact male votes, we impact, and the young women the most, right? So it's a really important thing. And I also thought that it's kind of goes with the theme with Natalia's book, right? So I can't imagine a more timely book than Natalia. And for those of you who don't have it, you should go buy it immediately. I want to show you the cover because I'm reading it on my iPad. And in Natalia's book, it's about a teen whose dad is running for president. And basically, it's sort of advocating for the power of activism and, standing up for the kinds of things that we believe in. So I was curious, Natalia, like where are the roots to your activism?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I think it's in those moments where, like, I've talked about this before, but when I was doing research for writing, one of the things that I did was that I went back and I read my old journal entries from when I was like 13, 14, 15. And I found this one entry in which I was questioning all the like power dynamics and the gender roles in my own household, in my family, like all around me. And it's kind of like my first rant. Like it's my first like manifesto of realizing like all my frustrations with all the inequalities going on around me. And I think like at the end of the day, like a lot of it's rooted in that I grew up really being expected to stay silent a lot of times, like internalizing this idea that like to be a good daughter, to be a good, just a good girl, like, just be polite, smile, and it just didn't sit right with me. And so I think like really now, like the roots of it is just, I think a lot about like who would that silence serve? And I repeatedly just come back to this idea that like, well, that silence only serves those in power and those who will harm our communities. And so even when I'm afraid to speak up, that's where I end up like finding the strength and the power and getting past that fear, because I don't think that fear is something that we should be ashamed of. I think we need to all acknowledge that we often have it. Like this is a scary time we're all in, but it shouldn't erase our actions and it shouldn't silence our voices.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the fear, all these emotions that we have that I don't know about you all, but like for me, like in my house, I wasn't really allowed to show a lot of my emotions. If I cried, I would be seen as weak. If I didn't know how to suck it up, they would be like, when I was a kid, and then suddenly I was, couldn't even feel bad about anything, right? And I think that one of it is being afraid, right? Even though we're facing all these things that are scary. But I do think that books, like what is exciting about reading these books, like I'm going to talk about Clap When You Land. For those of you who don't have it, go get it. You got to get all these books. I've been reading it with my son, and it's taking, we're not even finished yet because he takes his time, but like we read these parts and he'll see himself in a way being like young and Dominican. And there's that part with the queer character, right? Where, he's just like intrigued and interested. And he's like, oh, and she could just be queer? And I said, he goes, Dominicans are really homophobic, Mom. And, and I could tell like that hooked him in because he saw himself in it, right? So part of it, like, I think too, when you read these books, like what you're saying, Natalia, about like us facing fears and doing all this stuff, it's like what gives us courage is actually seeing ourselves in narratives where you have characters making these like minor, like they seem minor, but they're big, right? To be like, I'm just going to love who I love at a young age. It's so powerful, right? So what I was curious, Liz, because I think that these characters are going through so much, right? These two sisters who've lost their father, like, and I was thinking about who was the more difficult character to write?
I think
for you.
It's helpful to know that the story wasn't supposed to be a dual narrative. It was entirely written from Yahaira's perspective. And I had the entire manuscript done and felt like there's something missing. Like the story, I can't get a handle on the story, but there's the heart of it that is not there. Yeah, and I was talking with Ibi Zaboy, who, for folks who don't know, is a Haitian writer. She wrote American Street, she wrote Pride, Black Enough, which is a collection she was the editor for. And I'm telling her this, like I'm struggling with this character who figures out that her father has this whole other family. And she just like looked at me and was like, why aren't you writing from the sibling who's actually on the island? Like, why aren't you writing about the other sister? Like, when are we going to hear her? And it was this moment of, oh. And then Camino came through and was like the voice. And she took over the manuscript. And so I'll say that Yahaira was written first but she did not match up to the kind of momentum I had when I was writing Camino. And I had to go back in and figure out what are her secrets, what are her individual quirks, what are the ways that she moves through the world. I couldn't see her as clearly as I could see and understand Camino and like how dire, right, her shit was. And so it was almost like this reverse engineering in trying to bring the characters up to be able to hold their own through the passages. But I'll say that Yahaira was harder because her conflict is quieter. And trying to get that across, that it's not always these big bombastic things. Sometimes it's just, I don't know who I want to be. I don't know if I did the right thing before my father passed. I don't know if telling my girlfriend that like coming out feels superfluous. Like I shouldn't have to. I'm not in a closet. I'm not, like those little moments, trying to give them the same gravity as what Camino was dealing with, and trusting that it is okay to have a quieter storyline.
There's this, I find it always harder to write a character that's closer to an experience that I know well than one that I don't know so well, right? So I think that there's also that, like the reluctant protagonist is often the one that is closer to us, right? So I thought, oh, she's having way more fun with this one, right? Like those beach scenes, I was like, she's having way more fun. I could tell, right? You could tell, like when you're reading a book, you're like, this is when the writer's having fun, So it's pretty cool. So, and thinking about fun, Jen. So you're the book I read most recently because I just received it. And, and again, because I have a kid and I want to get him to reading, I'm always like reading him in the morning. Like he'll come to my room to wake me up and to eat breakfast. And I'm like, no, let's read a chapter. And we start your book and he's like, oh no, health class. He's like, Mom, that's in a book. And then I could tell he was like, what's going to happen now? I'm like, oh, okay. And I was thinking about your experience that you were a teacher, but I was wondering, were you also in a program like MECO that was to, like these opportunities that are often offered to students of color? And as a person, if you were you?
No.
You weren't. Okay. So I'm curious why you chose to write that particular narrative, but also like, why do you think that's an important narrative right now for young people to read?
Yeah. Oh my God. Such great questions. I mean, first, I was thinking about young people when I wrote the first page, because as a teacher, I felt like I would constantly give books to my students, my kids, and like, they would give it the first page. They'd give it the cover and the first page. And if they weren't interested, they would drop it. Ask for the pass. Can I go to the nurse? I got to go to my locker. So I hope your son made it to the second page. That feels like a major accomplishment. So thank you. But yeah, no, I wasn't in a program like MECO, but I was constantly between worlds. I was hanging out with my family, extended relatives in Boston, and then going back to the suburb where my nuclear family and I lived, with my white friends, my white teachers, my white neighbors. So I felt like very much in two worlds. But when I was 16, I did a program sort of like MECO on an extreme level, where I went to Africa. I went to Zimbabwe to do a community service project. And I went with all these rich white kids from all over the country. So it was like a double like immersion, like desegregation, like 2.0 kind of experience. And it's always fascinated me how who we are and the spaces we occupy like changes who we are and what we're willing to reveal and how and when and how much. But right now, I think we all have to like kind of just tighten our ponytail, tighten those laces, like get in gear to be braver and to use our voice, because this is it. We're in a time of reckoning, and I just feel like I can feel it in the air, and I think sometimes maybe young people feel like, what do I have to say? What can I do? But they can do a lot. They can do a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think, Lilliam, I was thinking about your work in the ways that, first of all your books are so different from each other. And I love that. I love that you have this breadth of speculative and then like realism and then like, and now you're doing this retelling, right, of this Greek myth. And I was wondering, as a writer, what was your experience writing within the constraints, I guess, around the Greek myth?
Yeah. Oh, so the Orpheus book, the Orpheus myth, I grew up watching Black Orpheus when I was a teenager. And so I love that movie. And that's a retelling, obviously it's set during Carnival in Rio, in Brazil. And so when I saw that when I was a kid, I was just like in awe of it. And then I got into the myth. And then, you know, so I was in love with that, the idea of love and hope and tragedy. And so I was in despair when I was thinking about writing, what I was gonna try to write next, because Hurricane Maria had touched Puerto Rico and had affected my family, and you know, people were lost and people lost things and all this stuff. And I was really like angry and full of rage still. And so how can I write this book and find hope? I was like, I needed to find hope. So the only way I could do it is using a structure. So the myth provided me with the structure and a way to contain my hope and my rage in a way that it wasn't like, I'm gonna write everything I hate and I'm just gonna, like that, you know. I needed love. I really did. I really needed love. So these characters appear when I needed it. And so, so the myth helped me, gave me the structure. It gave me the house or whatever. And then inside I had to figure out how to interpret their desires and their wants. And these
it's sexy.
Oh.
It's hot. It's sweaty. It's pre-COVID times. If you miss the summer when people were sweaty on the bus, like, you know, like hugging and touching, this is a good book to read. You could be in it. It's so
true. It's so summer. It's so summer. New York summer when everybody's half naked. I love it.
No, it was like, when I read it, I was like in full quarantine. You remember the beginning of quarantine where we were all so alone and we missed affection and all this crazy stuff? I was like, You know.
I don't know, like, I know that we're in full force, like we have to go, yeah, like everyone's like pushing on, we gotta vote, yes. But I also feel like the young people are out on the streets. The young people are leading this, you know, this revolution. So I don't know, like I understand the weightness of like, this is do or die situation, but they're out there. They are in the face of all this hostility, all this violence. So I don't know, I don't know what it is, and maybe it's just me today. I just feel like there's gotta be something else besides this urgency of like just shit around, you know what I mean? And I don't know what that is.
I think I love that you brought that up, Lilliam, because like, you know, a lot of times when I've heard people talk about running, they'll be like, so then go vote. And I'm not saying that we should all be voting. If we have the privilege to, we need to use it, right? But Maddie is 15 and running, and she can't vote. So what does she do instead? You know, what are her friends doing instead? And I don't like, you know, when you look through history at the movement, at things that have really truly like been like big changes, it wasn't just because lawmakers one day found it out of the kindness of their hearts to decide to put new laws into place. You know, like it was fueled by movements. It was something that people knew, like we can't just wait around every 4 years, 2 years, every time there's an election and hope that they get it right. It was because people were like, we're gonna make our voices heard, or we're gonna make it so you can't ignore them. And, you know, I think like my parents, for my whole childhood, like my parents couldn't vote in this country. We weren't, you know, they weren't citizens. And so I find it really interesting when people talk about it like that's the only power we have, because I feel like it's a disservice to anyone who isn't old enough to vote, who maybe is formerly incarcerated and lives in a state that doesn't give them the right to vote, for anyone, like people whose votes are being disenfranchised right now, even though they technically have the right to vote. But there are so many, like especially people of color, you know, who like there are active efforts by our own government, you know, to suppress those votes. And so we need to be, I think those two things can coexist. Like, yes, absolutely, this election is crucial. So I don't know that, you know, somebody said today, like, oh, you know, maybe just 4 years of Trump wouldn't be worse than the alternative. And I'm like, I don't think it's going to be 4 years. You know, so we have to think about that. But I also feel like we can't ignore the voices of all of, like, we can do two things at once. You know, we can say like, yeah, this is like, we need to like, there's so many things wrong with the system that we're working in. Can we like, this is the one thing that I don't really consider voting a form of activism. I think like for someone who has that privilege, it's like really, it's like one thing we can do. But when I look at like the people who I admire as activists, it's like, it's those who are like weighing so much and risking so much in order to get their voices heard and to take real action. You know, and in a number of ways that looks, because not everyone can be marching, you know, not everyone can, like maybe like we all have different purposes and skills and, you know, passions to lend to a movement, but like it all matters and it's all like going to make an impact if we can really like come together to do it.
100%. I think that that's true. Like, especially, I mean, if we look at climate change and the force behind that are a lot of young people who don't have, right, the right to vote yet, or that they're old enough to vote. And I think that just having the bodies out there, but also I think about the dramatic differences that that impacted me and my community were people who just went out of the way to help me. Like Jen, when you read about education, right, we think about how it could take one person to see you and pull you aside and help you get to the next step, right? And I think that all of these gestures of just taking care of each other in our community are, you know, really what has been highly impactful for me. So I'm curious, like, in this idea of like our teenage selves, right? Because now we're on this side of it. And I feel like sometimes people see me and they seem like, and I think of, oh, when I was like, you know, 15 or 16, well, I didn't even know writers existed back then. Let me say like alive. I thought they were all dead. But let's say when I was in college and I went to see someone like Edwidge Endicott, and I would say, you know, I would look at her and she just seemed so far away from me. Like it was something I could never get to the other side, right? And I think about how do we get to the other side? I don't, you know, I think it's by facing our fears, but also like sort of that moment where you just decide to do the most scary thing ever, right? And I want to ask, like, if you want to share a moment of your younger self where you did something, you stood up for yourself or to someone, or faced a fear that you now understand was like a crucial turn in your trajectory as a writer.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, Jen?
That's a good question.
Because I think about the seeds. I'm like thinking about
I hear you 100%. It's those points of no return, you know, those pivots where you're like, okay. Like you almost like shed an older version of yourself and you're like, here I'm becoming, you know? And for me, there was a moment, I think it was freshman year in college. I went to a country club of a college, you know, and it was a great opportunity, yada, yada. But there were times that were tough. And I remember being in a class and there was, you know, somebody asked a question about immigration. It was like, boom, all eyes on me, you know, like 80 eyeballs, like, whoosh. And I just felt like, I don't know, you know, I felt like I was a representative and everything. And for that day, I felt like I've had enough. And I do want to say something, and my face turned red, my neck turned red. And that's the myth, right? Is that like when you do step up, that it's like somehow you're all like courageous. It's like, no, you might turn red, or you might ugly cry, or you might like, you know, do all those things, and it's okay. But I remember just kind of giving the people like sharing what I had to say, you know, and I know what it was. I put it in the book too. Somebody was mad because they're like, why is everything in Spanish? Like, why when I go to the ATM, it asks me if I want for it to be in Spanish? And I'm like, have you ever thought about Florida, Colorado? This means Florida, Colorado. Like the Spanish were here first, you know? It's kind of like, if you really want to go there, like education, history, all this. And people, I think, don't often know that. And anyway, that was a turning point. But you're right, you know, stories, I think like sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is talk to your friend, or have, like for my mom, to convince her friend, her amiga, like, don't vote for Trump. Like, I'm serious, you know, like to me, that's her activism. That's her way of being like out in the streets, so to speak. So it doesn't have to be voting. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, it's but and, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else have a moment that you want to share for our young people here who can't imagine like the other side of things?
I don't know if this is the best example. I've been trying to comb and see if I could find one that's a little sharper, but I think I was someone who was really comfortable being vocal in class. I had been part of a nonprofit organization in Harlem called the Brotherhood Sister Soul, which I think just did a lot for my confidence in terms of who I was and my understanding of history, my ability to push back against whiteness and white folks who would try to propagate knowledge that was unfounded, right? It wasn't true. And so I was fine even in high school being like, nah. Like I remember in high school somebody bringing up Columbus and like just having to chew them out, right? And then the teacher afterwards being like, great job, right? Like, so that was the environment that I was in. It was harder for me to be brave at home, right? I could in English defend myself. I could get across what I wanted to say. I could wield it. In Spanish, I always felt little and I felt tongue-tied. And it was so clear that I had to be very careful with how I said things and asked things and debated things and made my proposals very specific. Like, so here's why I think that I should be able to travel abroad with the rest of my high school class, right? Like it was, and it was, I wasn't sure if I would be able to go away for college because no one in my family had ever gone away for school. My older brothers hadn't gone away for school, and trying to convince my mom that it made sense for her youngest and her only girl to go hours and hours away to places she had never seen, much less heard of. And she could not understand, like, New York has schools. Like she couldn't, like, why? Like, you know, your brothers went to BMCC, like go to BMCC. And I'm like, no, I get that. And I could, but like, I need to go away. Like a part of me knew I can't stay home because I won't grow into the person I want to be. And pushing, and I think really standing my ground and explaining it, and like taking my mom on college tours with me, like having to show up for myself. You know, that early on was tough, but I think sometimes we imagine that being brave is just outward and is just in front of audiences, and I think it's those little moments of trying to reconcile that you may come from places that make it difficult to be the person you want to be, and that you can't just abandon those places sometimes. So how do I bring this woman I adore with me and maybe have her even support me or like cheer me on this endeavor? And years later, my mom actually told me, she's like, you know, there's so many times you would push back and I thought you were making the wrong decision. And I'm so glad you leaned into what you thought you should do. You know, and so it was, I didn't know at the time if I was right. But and maybe it's being a school teacher, Jen, I'm sure you know, like you plant the seed and it doesn't come back until 10 years later. A kid is like, remember that one lesson? That was great. You're like, you were paying attention? And that's how it feels. These little seeds I planted, and my mom will come back years later and she's like, yeah, that one time you did that, that helped me be brave.
Yeah.
And I think that's super dope. So
yeah, but that, I love that. And it makes me think, okay, for those of you who haven't seen the book, I don't know if I showed this one, don't ask me where it come from. Jen, you know what I loved is that the mother character didn't do the thing I expected her to do.
No.
She's like, no, you're leaving, which is so like a lot of the Latina narratives are about parents who resist the departure from the neighborhood or to college, right? And here you have the mother who's concocting the plan for her to like be outside the neighborhood, right? Or like taking the long journey there. And I thought that was really important because, you know, I actually think like one of the beautiful things about books now, and always, is that when you have a book, like when a teen has a book, I found that my books, for example, like I'll meet someone's mother and they said, yeah, my kid read it in college, so I read it too. So the books, they're seeing other ways to imagine, you know what I mean? Like this reality, right?
Completely. And if I could jump in, I think with with YA, one of the biggest people ask me, like, do you get email? Like, what are the things you get that like bolster you? And it really is the interactions I've had with moms who tell me they read the Poet X and it changed how they mothered. Or daughters told me they bought the book. And these will be women who are 35, 40. I bought the book for my mom so that we could talk about something that happened when I was 15. That these are now touchstones, right? Our books allow for conversation. And growing up, that, like, I remember buying Julia Alvarez's And the Name of Salome in Spanish so my mom could read it, and in English for myself so we could discuss it. And reading those bilingual books was huge, but I just wanted to have a thing we could share. And I think our book's doing that. Like, it has to change both the child, but also in the other direction too.
Right. No, and yeah, like someone was saying in Natalia's book too, right? So like every time the parents defy the stereotype that we see constantly in movies and even in our own lives, like we're basically doing what the novel should be doing. The novel should be doing the impossible possible. It seems so easy. Like, of course you got into a great college, go away, you know? And like, I tell you, so many people I know who turned down scholarships at major institutions to stay close to home, right? Which is fine too. Like there's a value in community and taking care of your family, but I think that seeing these narratives is really wonderful too.
Yeah. Well, I think like with running, for example, like it was interesting to me because the mom, like Maddie's mom in initial drafts was not someone I had devoted a whole lot of time to, sadly, and kind of embarrassingly, because I was so focused on, the whole point of the book is her dad's running for president. But then I realized like so many of the things that happen are like they happen across generations. And so like Maddie's mom, in ways that she's participated in Maddie's own silencing, like she's also had that same silencing happen to her. So I just love what you said, Liz, because it's true. Like by the time I finished like revising and writing, I realized that like Maddie's journey actually is one that ends up empowering her mom as it empowers her. And there's something so beautiful about the ways that we witness each other's journeys. And I don't think that there's an age limit on, on how much we can really help each other like change and evolve and, not let go of regrets, but like realize like we can still, we can still let go of those things that we thought were being imposed on us all this time, like who says, it's just this like, this pressure, right? Of like, oh, you should stay home, you shouldn't go away. Like I went away to college for one semester and I was the first in my family to do it, and then I came back, to Miami, but that was my journey, and later on, like my sister who's older than me, she told me, it's kind of like what you're saying too, Liz, like she told me, she's like, I really look up to you for that. I didn't realize like I could have done that too. And so it's just like, there's these ways where we can kind of, where the dynamics can sometimes flip, and we're not like, you don't have to be older than someone to teach someone, or to like have an impact on them. And I love that. I think that we're all learning that so much even today, by like what you're saying. It's like so many of the young people are the ones out there right now. And it's sad that that's what it had to, that's what it is right now. Like we should be out there too, like, in our own ways, like, or those, the adults in the room in power. And,
well, someone's asking a question, which I think, Natalia, like thinking about, I don't know, while you were speaking, I was like, I feel like, especially in immigrant communities and, the Latinx women I know, it's a big, broad category, but I think that, when you learn a new language, you become again. When you're in a new country, you have to become again. It's like a whole new way of becoming, because you're literally starting over, right? So there's kind of a becoming of age. But someone's asking this question, which I think is interesting too. They're saying, what is the other side? I had to the other side. What does becoming mean when we consider elitism and activism in literature, right? Like, which is like, I feel like when I went away to school, very, very late, I went first to school in New York, and then I went away to school. Getting an education created a huge canyon between my family and I, because suddenly we weren't speaking the same language. Right? So I wonder, like, do any of you want to say something about what does it mean becoming, considering elitism and activism, or those things are seen as elitist,
I mean, I've spoken about my brother who was awarded a scholarship to attend a boarding high school away from home, and we didn't speak to him for 4 years. And we didn't realize how messed up it was, like how devastating it was to his psyche, because he was coming from someone from the housing projects who didn't have money. He couldn't call and, hey, can you send me money? No, we don't have. And then being around people who all have money, who literally all have money. And so I didn't know how devastating that was until he graduated and got into Cornell. And then he became, and then he was very much into the radical movement. He became very, very outspoken and all of that, right? So, but all those 4 years was of silence, right? And I think about myself too, like I didn't go back and forth. I never had that, there was no opportunity, like there is no complaining. You just do it. You just, this is an opportunity and you just take care of it. And so, I don't know, I think, I always think back of my kid, I have a 15-year-old, and sometimes I'm like, I push, like, no, we're getting the best for you. And sometimes that's not, the best could be the white, and that is not the best. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, oh, actually, that's not helping her. So that, it's weird, because that was always the push, right? The push is to, like, and I'm learning that that's not the push. The push is to make sure that she gets the best education. And that education means, like, having to educate people that that's not, you're wrong. Like, where's the truth in all this, right? So these conversations are amazing. Also, TikTok is amazing, because she's bringing in this information to me. She's talking about sexuality, she's talking about politics, and it's through TikTok. So I just want to say, like, like, young people are out there.
Like TikTok, like, that's the perfect, it's the medium that might change, but it's all storytelling,
Right.
We're talking about novels, TikTok, like gossip, text, passing notes, all that. I think that's the kind of, when you boil it down, that's what we're talking about here. And stories change. There's that great quote that Leslie Marmon Silko has about stories have the power to heal, to create. I'm going to find it. It's so good. And it's basically how, like, stories are everything, and I think with all of us writing these stories, maybe young people, other people, not just young people, but see these, like, little scenes. And like you're saying, Liz, like, they're seeds that might sprout next week, next year, 10 years from now. They might ignite a conversation that might otherwise not have happened, or they might be able to give a person that, what did Walter Dean Myers call it? That shock of recognition when you read someone like you in a book. And it doesn't have to be that they are like you on a level of identity, but just that you recognize yourself on that page. And that, to me, is so powerful, because then that translates, it's like a parallel jump to then you raise your hand in class, and then you are going away to college, and then you pursue writing, and now you're you know what I mean? So it's like, it might seem small, but I just love that you've put this together, Angie, like the writing, the book club. If I had had something like that, I mean, I was reading Anne of Green Gables like 10 times because I didn't have another book in my house. And it was just like, if I had a book club like this, I can't even. So, but yeah, I think the common denominator is story. It's crazy, right? Like, when you hear a story, or when you read a story or watch a story, there's a dopamine rush in your brain, like smoking a cigarette or something. Like, you get this rush, and you have to find out how it ends. And so in that way, it's like addictive. I think it's a great addiction to have an addiction to stories, and you read these books, then you want to read others and others, and kind of like gives you that more gas in the tank, kind of like, I could go further, I could do this, or I could sit here and hang out with my friends, and that's cool too. Like, I don't know.
I wanted to say, like, thank you for mentioning the book club, because I feel like the reason we're all here is for the book club, right? So there's a lot of people that are here that don't know really how the book club works, but basically it got started in the neighborhood through a food relief, and then Word Up took over and organized it. And we have all these amazing people, bicycling and delivering these books all over the neighborhood, which is kind of amazing, to teens, right? And college students. And for me, like when I was walking in the beginning of quarantine in the neighborhood, I kept thinking, what are these kids doing at home? Like they can't be watching TV all day. Like they just can't, right? And I thought, what would it be like if they had books? Like, will they read them? Like, you know, I unfortunately have a number of kids in my family that are reading averse. So I feel like you have to force feed a little bit the books, even if it's own voices, like, you know, and all these different things. But I did think like, oh, if they don't read it, the family could read it. And so it made me think like how I'm hoping that one of these books, right? There were 10 books this summer. One of these books has the click, right? We don't know which book it's going to be. You know, we don't know what the issue is going to be that's going to turn one of these kids, you know, more, maybe inspire them to be more socially conscious or become different kinds of readers, etc. What were the books for you all as teens that, yeah, either got you to writing or like, yeah, that you saw you recognized yourself in a profound way?
So I'll answer and say Julia Alvarez, Before We Were Free, was one of the first Latinx texts I ever saw in my middle school. And as someone who grew up hearing many a fairy tale that somehow oriented around Trujillo, it was incredible to think about this character who, like, oh, my mom has been telling me stories about growing up under Trujillo forever, and like the witches who would sit on top of people's houses and listen in, and that's how they would find out who was spreading secrets about him or talk, like, right, all these stories, cuentitos that she had, and this is in a book at my school. Espérate, right? So that book was huge. But I do also want to say real quick to your other question, I was sitting here thinking a lot, and particularly because I know that perhaps some of the group members might be on here. This question of becoming is complicated, yeah? Because often when we talk about representation, and even the example you gave of looking at Edgewood Danticat, we look at other people to tell us and prescribe for us how we get there. How do I become you? But what we really want to become is the thing, how do I do the thing you do as myself? And I think it can be, it's curious to want someone to give you a blueprint. And I just hope that folks are really creating their own definition of what it means to have become the thing they want to be, right? That my definition of becoming is to feel completely free in how I am able to live in my language. And what I mean by that is that once I stopped feeling apologetic for every thought I had and how I expressed that thought, and was that too hood and was that too proper, or like, yo, my vocabulary is expansive, and sometimes people are like, well, how do we grab the voice? And I'm like, nah, like there's no grabbing. Like this is all of who I am, and it's in the poetry and the fiction, and when I get up on stage and when I'm in my house, and now working on when I'm talking to my family, like how can I be my most free self at all times? And when I look at women on stages who I greatly admire, it's because I believe that they have found that core in themselves, regardless of what they're doing or how they speak or whatever institutions they've gone to. There are folks, I love Cardi, because not because of anything except that she is herself at all times. And she has mastered what it means to be herself, right? Without anyone else telling her how to be a better, more, you know what I mean? And so that to me is, yeah, I want to become that. I want to become that. And so I think I just want to push a little bit at how we look and how we keep imagining, and also that like becoming is not static. Like I became someone who published, and then I became someone who is now writing a screenplay, and I will become many other things. I may become a rapper like Cardi, I don't know.
Oh my God, please do.
I got bars, though. I got bars. But I hope that, I wish someone had told me when I was 15 and desperately looking at folks to be like, who can I be? Who looks like who I imagine? And wanting to map myself onto people. I wish I had been told like, yo, there's no blueprint. You're going to have to make it up, and it's going to be unique to you. And so that becoming is only going to be whatever vision it is that you're projecting. And I think folks who rupture with like, I have gained a lot of success and I'm still not comfortable, it's because maybe they haven't answered the original question of like, what do you want and who did you want to become before you looked sideways at what other people were doing.
Yeah.
Snaps. Those are the bars right there.
Where's my beat?
What?
That's the intro to the album.
I can hear what your books are, but I have so many questions. Oh my God. Okay, other person say their book, because we are talking about books and how they change. And then I'm gonna have to ask another question. Who wants to answer the book question? Does anyone have a burning book?
Let's see. I didn't actually, so I know like oftentimes the first books that I saw myself in weren't like me seeing myself like as a Latina, you know, it was because I didn't actually read Latinx authors till I was like in high school. But I will say because I moved here when I was 4 and I started school in like not speaking English yet, it was really, really hard for me to learn to read because nobody, like once I learned English, so I was in ESOL, and then they put me back into like, you know, like I was no longer in ESOL, but when we started to learn to read, I was learning to read in English, and I didn't yet have like a full grasp of the language. And I think back then they didn't know that you should teach someone to read in their native language first. Mm-hmm. And so my teachers would put me in the back of the class and like send me home with like cassette tapes and extra workbooks to like, you know, try to work on. And at the same time, so the book that I feel like really clicked for me was Matilda by Roald Dahl. And it was for a number of things. It was because, you know, Matilda is this little girl who reads all the books in the library. But also at the time that I was reading it, I had surgery on my hip. And so I was not in school for like 6 months at a time because I had like a cast from my chest down to like my left ankle and then like half of my right foot. And so I would go to work with my mom. My mom would like take me in my cast, in my wheelchair and everything, and I wouldn't know what to do except read. And it was really wonderful to know, like, here's this little girl whose like superpower is reading, and look at all these places she's like going, you know, through books and through her imagination. And you know, when she writes limericks on the first day of school, I decided to write limericks. Like my mom had a typewriter in her office, and so I was like, let me write limericks, you know. But I will say that it was the first time I really felt empowered, at a moment when I didn't really like feel very empowered in terms of like my, you know, my like the world around me, my physical place in it. And I carried that through like my whole life. Like it's something that like I look back on and I'm like, God, that was like such a fun time in my life. Like I loved those days, you know, at my mom's office, just reading and typing limericks. And I think it's just like a beautiful testament to what stories can really do.
I like want a book of a little girl who like basically homeschools herself, because that is so badass. It's just like I gave myself my own curriculum and homework and was out here. Like I think that's amazing. I just was so moved.
I'm sure that's gonna happen right now with this pandemic. I mean,
oh word, yeah.
So I have a question. So we're going to go through these pretty quickly. Let's like try to answer them so we get everyone in. So one question is from Ashley Rodriguez Lantigua. And she's asking, as an aspiring writer and immigrant Dominicana, I often feel as if I have so many stories that are so worth telling. But as I go through college, I feel like I don't have enough time to tell those stories for class, or there's much space made in higher academia to tell these stories. How do I nurture these stories that have all this potential? Who wants to answer that?
I want to say you have to pick one and you have to write it to the end. You have to fit, like to me, I feel like people stop in the midpoint, which is the hardest part, I feel. And it's like you have to finish that project, because once you have a draft, then that's something that you can, that's gold right there. And then you could go right back and start and finish, you know, finesse it and continue. But grab one story and just work it all the way through to the end. Because there's so many people who just stop. There's so many good writers out there who I like teach, and I'm like, so what happened to that story that I remember because you were workshopping it? And then they're like, look, don't give me excuses. If you want that story to live, then you got to put the effort. You got to put it in there, because nobody's going to give you the time or day. Nobody cares.
Word.
But if you have the passion, do it. You know?
I also feel like the question brings up audience, right? Because some of it is like, how do I do this for class if there isn't enough time? How do I make space in academia? And it may be that some of what you're feeling is that in this space, I don't feel cared for enough to show some of this work, or like there's time or the energy. And so that might not be the space to to bring that work, especially if it's still new. And I'm a big fan of collectives. I'm a big fan of peer reviews. I get a lot of people asking me for mentorship. And I think that sometimes having conversations with other writers who are also starting, who maybe also are craving a really generous reader and audience, like that's where it's at, because you can get those early edits and start developing your voice and feeling sure in the story. Here's this other person who's hyping me up. We all need a hype man on the stage, right? And so I would say, like, find the readership and the audience that makes sense to what you're doing. And that doesn't mean don't take creative writing classes. That doesn't mean don't work on that, but don't think that that is the only space that is possible for your work to exist. And don't think that that is the audience for your work either.
Right.
So Liz, I'm gonna ask this question because it's connected, right? So we could get through all these questions. So I'm being moderator here. So like, one person is asking, and this actually came up in my grad class yesterday, of like, you know, we're all writing about really difficult things, being undocumented, not feeling seen, not feeling heard, you know, working class situations, death, loss, all this stuff. What do you do? A writer's asking, what do you do when you feel overwhelmed with the content matter? And I feel this is also connected to what do you do for self-care, right? Like, we're writing about hard things, but we also have to be in the world. So what are some things that you all do?
I want to, maybe I can answer that and also kind of go back to real quick, because I think they are linked. Like, I do think that we need, like, the question to me is really about like how gentle we are with ourselves, especially right now. And, you know, to the question about like having enough time, like sometimes there are times in our lives where we have to like prioritize certain things, or maybe like we just don't have it in us in that moment to write, whether the content matter is too hard, whether our lives are just too busy otherwise. And I don't think that means that a story is going to just die. It's still in you. It's still like being nurtured. You're still like, everything that you are doing and everything that you are feeling, all the things that like we're experiencing are still feeding that story. And our creativity doesn't always have to look like productivity. Yeah, I think there's like this, we get so hard on ourselves for, okay, did I finish this story or this draft by the end of whatever time, like whether it's a semester, whether it's a few months or whatever. But so for me personally, like when I'm going through this right now because my next book is it's so very personal. And Angie, going back to what you're saying about how hard it is to write, the closer you are to a person's experience, like I feel that real hard. And I'm really trying hard not to only focus on the things that hurt, and think really about like, well, when I think of the things that hurt, you know, me now being this person who is older and who is a writer, what would I do if I could go back and protect her? And what are the things I would be wanting to protect? And so, like, because that's where we find like the thing, like even if we have anger, even if we have pain, even if we're wanting to create change, it's all going to be rooted in love. And it's all going to be rooted in the things that we're trying to protect as we move forward. So I think like really find ways to really stay in touch with that and to be unapologetic about letting that come onto the page just as brilliantly and just as vibrantly and just as like alive as all the things that are painful. And know that sometimes they're going to coexist. Like you might start a scene thinking it's a happy scene and that it inevitably finds its way to the pain. And sometimes you might find a scene, you know, starts out in a painful place, but it finds its way to joy. And those things can and often do coexist, and that's okay.
Yeah, how they say, like, you're laughing so hard till you cry, that kind of a thing. I mean, I think it's important to like demystify that writing doesn't have to look a certain way and look one specific way. I wish I had someone do that for me, because I really did. I think, like you said, Angie, it's like, okay, white men who are dead wrote all the books, and then you have some people who are still alive, okay, fine. And then I'm like, but they're still at a desk somewhere writing longhand, or I always thought that you wrote a book from beginning to end. Like the order that it's published in. I thought that's like how you wrote it. You know? So once I found out, like, oh, you don't have to write it in order, I'm like, that is so cool. Like I can do anything.
That's a big deal though.
You know, or that you can let projects simmer for a long time. It's like, you know how it is, like cooking, it's like I don't cook, so I don't know why I just said that. But you know, but that's the metaphor I'm gonna go with. So, I can imagine one who cooks has multiple pots on the stove.
But okay, so we're gonna close very soon. We have one last question, which is like I guess like an action item here. Like, what are some of the orgs or workshops that you want to recommend to aspiring writers? Carolyn Ramos wants to know. Like, are there any really good ones that you know that you would like to recommend to aspiring writers?
Vona. Voices of Our Nation Arts Foundation. I'll put it in the chat.
Honestly, I don't know. I go by teacher. If I like someone whose work I really admire, then I want to learn from them. So if they happen to be teaching, I just pay attention to where they're at. I guess that's the way I do it. Because I'm like, oh, you wrote this book I love, then I just want to know how you, not even how you do it. I just want to just listen, you know, so not sure.
So we could add those to the chat. I just want to close out because it's 7 o'clock, but I also want to tell everyone that's here that you need to support these books. Speaking about voting, like, you vote with your dollars. I really believe that. And I think that, you know, it is rare in my experience to see so many Latinx books coming out at the same time. This one is still on pre-order. It comes out officially September 15th. You know, Clap When You Land just came out. Like, all your books really just came out all at the same time. We're going to be on the tables all at the same time. It's historically, like, I have never experienced. So I think that in order for this to, you know, for other writers to be supported, we need to support each other. So please do that. And and write reviews on Amazon and Goodreads or whatever it is that you do, because that makes a really big difference, especially for debut writers like Jenn de Leon and Natalia Sylvester, who just debuted her YA. It makes a huge difference if you're reviewing them on all these platforms. So it just changes the algorithm and all of that. And that's something we could do, and it's so easy. So I love you all. I can't believe you did this for me. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I want to read the Leslie Marmon Silko quote for everybody about.
Oh yeah, let's close there, and then Memphis is gonna come and really close the event.
Okay, all right.
Okay, go.
I will tell you something about stories. They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They are all we have, you see, all we have to fight off illness and death. You don't have anything if you don't have the story.
Amen.
Beautiful.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.
So I just want to say thank you all for helping close out this event. Thank you, Angie, for coordinating this, for all of you trusting in Angie and deciding to come on and join us. And, you know, Loma Slip program, it was a pilot program. It was the first time we did it, and it was really amazing. And it was really enriched because we had, so, like you said, so many books out on the market at the same time that we actually had to choose from. You know, we didn't have to pull back from the vault. And it's been really great to, you know, have our conversations with our Loma Slip readers who were in the audience saying thank you, and sharing in this community that's growing, this reading community in the Heights. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your voices with us through your writing, but also through tonight's event. I was really happy to hear and excited to hear the responses you had to the questions. They were very thoughtful and quite inspiring. So thank you. This is the end of Loma Slit. I'm actually quite sad. It's the end of Loma Slit as our summer program. We might continue it on in the future. We might try and do a parent teen book club. Do you have any books coming up or translations of your books? You know, that'll
someone just asked if any of your books are in Spanish. Mine is coming out in Spanish. Anyone else have books in Spanish?
I just have one in Spanish, and with the Fire and High will be coming out before the end of this year.
Yeah, my first book is in Spanish.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say my first book is in Spanish.
Oh, cool. Oh, right. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, my second novel for Everyone Knows You Go Home comes out in Spanish in April.
Oh, and thank you to the interpreters. I was talking way too fast. I forgot I was like, oh my God, we're being interpreted. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, we're out.
Picture. I'll just. Oh.
I got you. I was ready.
Oh my God. You ready? Okay, I'm gonna do it again. Ready? Okay, 1.
en el frío que hace por la madrugada.
Machateame. El viejito, el viejito.
¡Qué envidia!
Dominicans are just like, eso.
Oh man.
You word up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
All
much
right.
for doing this programming. If you're interested in hearing about anything else that Word Up is doing, participating in any of our future book clubs, events that we'll be having, events that will probably feature books by the authors who are featured here tonight. You can follow us at wordupbooks.com. And you can also support our programming by donating to our Gofundme campaign, which helped pay for some of the books that were a part of our program this summer, and joining our mailing list so that you can stay abreast of whatever's happening, not just with our shop, but also we share information about our neighborhood. So I just want to say thank you so much. Stay safe. Oh, school year. I know there were a lot of mention of children. Good luck with that to all who are dealing with that, either from the teaching side, the parent side, the school side. I know I'm in school, and I really appreciate this. We appreciate you. What did Duke Ellington say? He said, "We love you madly." So good night and stay well.